Hi class, week 3, we're now into lesson 3.2, and what we're talking about now in 3.2 is nature's design principles as a measure of sustainability. And this talk is called Life's Principles as a Measure of Sustainability because, as we talked about earlier in the week, I want to keep the idea of these principles broad, but most of our course is focused on the biomimicry's method, and they call them life's principles. So we'll stick with that for now. Earlier, you saw a version of this slide. And that's when I talked about the ultimate goal of sustainable design being about supporting life on Earth. And we said life on Earth, we mean all life, all living things now and forever. I'm guessing some of you who are very involved in sustainability may have had a bit of a hard time with this because you may be more familiar with the three spheres representation of sustainability, something more along the lines of this. So you all know the three spheres as environmental, social, and economic, right? Or sometimes called the three E's: environment, equity, and economy. Now, biomimetic design and biomimicry in particular are very focused on the environmental part of sustainability. So it's all about nature and sustaining life, right? However, the idea is that if you create designs that are inspired by nature, that are aligned with nature's rules and cycles, and that help people reconnect with nature, and that are more innovative, you will also be addressing the social and economic aspects of sustainability. So although they are not explicit when you use biomimicry or biomimetic design, they are implicit. Also, some of you may have thought about this already, but as this diagram implies that human social and economic spheres can exist outside of the environment, which of course implies that humans can exist outside of the environment. And one of the premises of biomimicry that we've already talked about is that humans are part of nature. Right now, as you're sitting here, even when you're in front of a machine and indoors, you are very much a part of nature in all of its cycles. Just the process of practicing biomimetic design will help you recognize that in new and deeper ways. I'm hoping you are or will be sensing or experiencing some of that during your BCI sessions. Another premise is that we humans don't need to come up with definitions of sustainability, like to struggle with all of this, because nature did it for us a very long time ago. So there's nothing wrong with this. I think it's fantastic that people finally came up with a way to sort of frame, what is sustainability and what are the components. But instead of ignoring these components, biomimicry encompasses them in a new way. So as we said, another premise is that we humans don't need to come up with definitions of sustainability, that nature did that for us a long time ago. As we discussed earlier, and as you've read on the cover of this week's folder, nature has some really tough standards of sustainability. So tough that 99.9% of species that have ever lived on Earth have not survived the evolutionary process. They were basically not sustainable given the operating conditions here on Earth. When we humans try and come up with rules for sustainability, we tend to end up with measurements for quantities of, say, specific chemicals that should not be exceeded, or minimum metrics that we must achieve. So we have laws and guidance with language like no more than so many tons per year of carbon emitted, or so many milligrams per liter of a given carcinogen can't be exceeded, or say no less than so many percent recycled content, right? So that's how we end up defining sustainability. But then every year we learn that these aren't high enough or low enough, or that two seemingly benign chemicals are horribly toxic when they're in combination, or that these levels won't be sustainable if these chemicals or practices are used at those levels by billions of Chinese, right? The point is that there's no way we can ever really define sustainability with a collection of individual discrete numbers any more than we can define human wellness with a set of numbers. So, what can we do? As our inquiring friend here asks, how do we know if our designs support life on Earth? The short answer is that we may never know. As we talked about last week, life on Earth is full of complex, dynamic systems and systems of systems, so it is impossible to determine the myriad potential consequences of our designs, as the systems in which they will be operating are always changing. We can, however, do our best to understand nature's rules for sustainability, what we're calling nature's design principles, and adopt them as our design principles. If our design principles can follow nature's design principles, then they should be able to support life on Earth. You were introduced to Biomimicry 3.8's life's principles earlier in this week in lesson 3.2. And of course, the sustainability idea here, as we just said, is if our design principles follow all of these life's principles all the time, and so that our design principles can meet all these operating conditions, then they will support life on Earth. Now, to get a sense of this, let's just take a look at a few of these principles, this lower right-hand corner of the butterfly here, which looks like this. This is the one about benign manufacturing. That one's kind of easier to understand, and it has these 3 different components: using self-assembly, using water-based chemistry, and using life-friendly materials. Now, imagine for a moment if all the products and processes we designed followed just 2 of these principles, the one about using water-based chemistry and using life-friendly materials. Now, that seems really simple, right? But it's also, if you work in industry, it may seem pretty impossible, given that the materials and manufacturing processes we allow ourselves to use now, petroleum, toluene, heat-beaten tree, we allow ourselves to go far beyond all this sort of stuff. However, every single material and part and function and waste product and manufacturing process of every living organism on Earth follows these 2 rules. And it's pretty hard to imagine any function that we could possibly want our designs to perform that isn't being performed somewhere in nature, following not only these 2 rules, but all of life's principles. Now, perhaps some of you have grass at your BCI spot, and I know we've touched on this before, but I like to keep referring back to the same examples to help you really understand what we're talking about. So grass generates sufficient renewable energy for its own needs, right? Collection from the sun. Well, in doing so, it also generates energy in the form of food for others in its ecosystem. Energy which in turn is endlessly cycled and recycled throughout the system. Grass itself is renewable and regenerative. It's full of color, it's waterproof, it can be stomped on and cut and eaten and frozen and yet recovered to generate more energy and food and be colorful and waterproof. And it does all of this and myriad other functions using only water-based chemistry and life-friendly materials. If we could design something that generated energy for itself and for others and was colorful and waterproof and could be stomped on and cut and frozen and yet recovered and continue to do the same, and doing all of that using only water-based chemistry and life-friendly materials, I'd imagine we'd make tremendous strides toward sustainable design. So if in your design work you only followed those 2 principles, you would make tremendous strides toward sustainability. Now, a principle, of course, is a bit broad and vague. And when you go to design something, you may find that you can't achieve the specs you want with water-based and life-friendly materials that are currently available, because we're not there yet. Now, although this is frustrating, and some people revert to just designing things that are kind of magical. In other words, it can't ever be built. We don't want to do that. We want you guys to actually be empowered to get real stuff done. So it can be frustrating. However, this frustration can drive innovation, and that's what we're going to talk about in the next lesson. So after you get done with this video, you're going to do your next BCI, where you're going to be observing life's principles in your natural spot. And I hope you get this has been really enjoyable to do these BCIs, and I'm looking forward to seeing your results. Okay, so I'll see you in the next lesson.